You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 25th of April, 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme. Thousands have paid their respects at St. Peter's Basilica, and thousands more will attend the funeral of Pope Francis tomorrow. We'll check in with our reporter on the ground, Juliet Linley, and also get the view from Italy and the United States on how the Pope has shaped religious and public opinion. After that,
we have significantly downgraded our projections for global growth. Major trade policy shifts have spiked uncertainty off the charts.
The IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva there. The IMF and World Bank are welcoming finance ministers from around the world at a time where US trade deals are the only game in town. We'll also hear from our very own editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, here with some in-house news about a new Monocle website. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. At 10 a.m. tomorrow in St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis will be laid to rest before the public and world leaders. And among those who are also in the Italian capital for the event is the journalist, broadcaster, and former Vatican correspondent and Monocle regular, Juliet Linley. Juliet, it hasn't been too long since you were last in Rome, but what a week it has been. What is it like to be back?
Yes, exactly. I had just left Rome the morning that Pope Francis passed away. That was Monday morning. It seems like a lifetime ago. And I'm now back here. And it's actually a national holiday, Chris. 25th of April is Liberation Day. Liberation 80 years ago from Nazi fascist rule. So the city outside of the Vatican area is very, very quiet. There's not a lot of traffic. There's so many parking spots. That's what always strikes you because this city is always so chaotic. But here in St. Peter's Square, it is packed with pilgrims. I think I'm hearing like there's been a flow of sort of 130,000 people coming to pay homage to the Pope. He's been lying in state since Wednesday mornings. And it's a very emotional time for a lot of people. There are different types of people you are seeing that we've been talking to in these long queues. They're waiting 2-3 hours, sometimes even longer, to pay their respects to the pontiff. Some are simply Romans who live nearby. And when you live in Rome, you just feel the presence of the Pope so much because the Vatican and St. Peter's Basilica, and they are such a big presence in the city. So they're coming and they say, I always found him simpatico. We always thought the Pope was a friendly guy, they say. You've also got visitors who came for Easter to see the Pope last weekend, and then they've stayed on after they saw that he had passed away on Easter Monday. And so they're coming also to pay their respects. You've got pilgrims who came here because it's a holy year. 2025 is a Jubilee year, and they had planned to come anyway. And then, interestingly, Chris, you've got a lot of teenagers milling about, and they are here because this very weekend was supposed to be the Jubilee for teenagers, because on Sunday, he was 14 years old when he died, a young British-born Italian teenager called Carlo Acutis was due to become a saint. He was known as the techie because he used his skills with the internet to spread the word of God. And unfortunately, his canonization has now been postponed. We don't know indefinitely, simply because you need a pope to be able to make a saint. And this Sunday, there will still be no pope. The funeral takes place tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock here at the Vatican. And the conclave, which is the process by which they will choose a new pope, the date has not been set yet, but it will be anytime after May the 5th.
It is so interesting the way you describe all those different types of people making a pilgrimage or being in Rome for this event, Juliet. How are you feeling about all of it? What is this like for you as also a former Vatican correspondent? And you've covered this many times before, I suppose, but what does it feel like?
But it brings back a lot of memories of the last papal funeral that took place, which was in 2005. And that was when John Paul II died, who's now a saint. So we should refer to her as Pope Saint John Paul II. And because in between, as you know, there was Pope Benedict XVI, that because he resigned, there was no papal funeral for him a couple of years ago when he passed away. So this brings back a lot of memories, and the same numbers of pilgrims are expected, hundreds of thousands, because Carol Wojtyla, just as Jorge Mario Bergoglio, they're very charismatic people. They really reached out to everyone, and people that I was talking to, just a couple of ladies just earlier who had literally got on an overnight coach from up in Piedmont, up in northern Italy, to come and pay their respects to Pope Francis. They just said, we've lost a grandfather. We felt so close to him. And they were actually saying, interestingly enough, that they're now hoping that perhaps it's time to have an Italian Pope again. There's been a Polish one, there's been a German one, there's been an Argentinian one. It's been 40 years since there's been an Italian one. And they were kind of hoping perhaps Cardinal Matteo Zuppi would be chosen. But that's all to be seen. We still have to have the funeral before we even start talking about who will replace Pope Francis.
Well, absolutely. We do have time for that. And as you say, the funeral is tomorrow. There's going to be a pilgrimage. There's going to be lots of people there. It will be a political occasion in a form, I suppose, as well. How is Rome preparing for all these world leaders who will also be gathering for this?
Well, yes. So tonight at 8:00, the Pope's casket will be closed. And then the preparations will take place in St. Peter's Square for what happens tomorrow morning on the Sagrato, the funeral service, which, by the way, is going to be led by Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, who is the Dean of the College of Cardinals. However, he is of the venerable age of 91 years old, so he won't be able to participate in the conclave, even though usually the Dean of Cardinals does just that. However, he will be leading all public events leading up to the conclave. So tomorrow there's the funeral. We're expecting all the big names in international leadership, from Donald Trump and Sergio Melania, Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Volodymyr Zelensky, and so on, and also European royalty. And a lot of crowds are expected tomorrow. They're saying that for Pope John Paul II's funeral, there were 300,000 around the Vatican City, and then another 600,000 in all around the city. And we're looking at similar figures tomorrow. And yes, security is going to be quite a nightmare between just having so many people all in the same city and so many big guns in the same city, literally like so many leading world leaders you have to worry about. Threat of terror attacks, possibly, as well as all sorts of other things that could go wrong. You also have to bear in mind, Chris, that this is the first time that in a long time that the casket is going to be moved from the Vatican City, from St. Peter's, all the way across town to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, one of the four major basilicas in the city. Now, usually the popes would be buried behind Vatican walls. So once the funeral ends, the sort of the casket will disappear behind closed doors, and then no one sees that again. However, in this case, there's going to be a whole procession crossing the city. That's another nightmare. Closing down lots of roads. You've got a lot of faithful who are going to be wanting to line the streets and pay their last respects. So there's a lot on the plate for the Italians in these next few hours and days.
There is certainly, and Juliet, you will be with us, I know, through the weekend, speaking to us as well. What are you expecting tomorrow in terms of where are you going to be?
I'm going to come as close as I can to St. Peter's Basilica.
Well, good luck with that. We hope you can get as close as possible. Juliet Linley, broadcaster and journalist, thank you very much for joining us from Rome. We will have more from Juliet throughout the weekend. But joining us now for a different take on Italy's moment this weekend is our own resident Italian here in London and producer of the Foreign Desk, Anita Riotta. Good afternoon, Anita.
Hi, Chris.
So you heard Juliet there touch on the fact that this isn't just a day of a celebration of Pope Francis's life. It is also 80 years since Italy's Liberation Day. What's your sense of how that's going to be marked today?
Well, exactly. This is the 80th anniversary of Italy's liberation. It's not the day that marks the end of the war, but it was this very symbolic day where the Partigiani, the resistance fighters in Italy, sort of launched a unified attack for maybe the first time, and it's the day in which the German retreat in the country began. And of course, being the 80th anniversary, it's a very big moment. President Sergio Mattarella will be in Genoa later today. He gives a speech at 11 a.m. London time, midday Italy time, if anyone wants to listen into that. But what's really interesting is that there's a lot of celebrations. You would think that for the 80th anniversary, they would go very big, and there's some of that going on. But on the other hand, because it's happening during this national period of mourning for the passing of Pope Francis, there's a bit of confusion on exactly how the country should mark it. Now, that's a bit of the generous take, that obviously you have to have a balance of this jubilation and this period of mourning. On the other hand, there are those that think the government, which, to remind our audience a bit, Fratelli d'Italia, Giorgia Meloni's party, historically has roots in neo-fascism. That's not an opinion. That is just sort of a historical fact, to be clear. They have instituted the longest national period of mourning for the passing of a pope that Italy has seen. It's been 5 days. Normally, it's not that long. That has been seized upon by opposition leaders in Italy. Mayors from Rome to Milan and others are saying that it's intentional to make the celebrations be subdued because this party doesn't necessarily love to be reminded about its fascist origins.
It is incredible how this has developed into a political thing. Do you get the sense from the papers and voters, how people will maybe react to that? It's always a delicate thing if opposition leaders also jump on this, but of course the party itself and Meloni will say, no, absolutely not. That's not what this is about. How dare you take the Pope's name in vain, frankly.
No, absolutely. It's fascinating in a way because it is drawing out all of the sort of bastions of Italian culture. You have the Catholic Church. You have its history, its recent history, fascism, the partisan or partigiani, the resistance movement. And so you're seeing all of these things come to a head. In Turin, there were massive protests yesterday, and sort of even devolved into clashes with the police because there was a feeling that the celebrations were not being honored enough and that this really was just a power grab by the Fratelli d'Italia governing party to make this day not be as important as it should be. And again, as we mentioned time and again, the 80th anniversary, you would really expect it to be quite a big celebration. One of the leading national papers in Italy, La Repubblica, went so far as to print this sort of accusation that this is being done because they said in one of their articles that this is a day that Fratelli d'Italia not only not want to remember, but definitely don't want to celebrate. That's a big statement from, the New York Times equivalent sort of Italy.
That is a very big statement. And Anita, we were also briefly talking with Juliet about the fact that world leaders are in town, which also sort of adds such a different, political element to this. The fact that it is not, in that sense, just about Pope Francis. You will have Donald Trump potentially there with European officials and others. Zelensky is there as well. What is your sense of how that's going to shape the weekend in Italy?
It's fascinating. It is an absolutely leader-studded affair. We know so far that Trump will be there. Of course, Meloni will be there. The European Union's von der Leyen, Argentina's Milei, France's Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Keir Starmer, Prince William, amongst a slew of other leaders and royals. So it's tough to imagine that some of these meetings are not going to happen. Now, the line that people are taking is varying. Donald Trump has come out and said, I have a bunch of meetings. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani has sort of tried to step on the brakes a little bit, saying this is a solemn affair. But of course, with all these international leaders in town, I'm sure there will be some bilaterals, but he's stressing that this is not an international summit. But you have to take into consideration that this is becoming an impromptu microcosm of all the geopolitical tensions we're seeing around the world right now. As you said, Zelensky will be there. The Russian Minister of Culture will be there. There is an ongoing sort of dispute, if you want to say it, between Israel and Vatican City after there was a sort of tweeted condolences from the Israeli government that was deleted. Netanyahu only sort of said something along the lines of, "We're sorry for his passing," days later. So all of these elements are coming to Rome. And with Liberation Day, the Pope, all of these geopolitical tensions all coming together in the same time, same place. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what comes out of the weekend.
There is so much that's going to be happening this weekend in Rome. Anita Riota, thank you very much for joining us on The Briefing. And while Donald Trump will be in Rome this weekend for the Pope's funeral, questions are underway back in the United States about how any successor to Pope Francis might deal with the U.S. administration, or indeed whether an American pope could be on the cards. And joining us now for a look at the U.S. is Jason Pack, host of the Disorder podcast. Jason, thanks very much for coming on the show. Pope Francis's last meeting was, of course, with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. What has been your impression of how the Pope is viewed by the Trump administration? He certainly didn't shy away from criticism.
Oh, the Trump administration and people in Vance's orbit have looked negatively on the Pope because they understand how much legitimacy he has with global Catholics. And as we've seen with the outpouring of support and his ability in his passing to call attention to issues of social justice, climate change, Palestinians, he cuts through and across many other dividing lines. So they need to tread carefully in criticizing either the Pope's legacy or a potential future successor.
They do need to tread carefully also because to sort of bring politics into this, when you look at American Catholics, they do tend to vote Democratic, but they have shifted towards Republicans in recent decades. So how will they be looking and watching what the Trump administration does and how it handles this moment?
I think white Catholics are voting majority Republican now, and that's a shift over the last 20 years. I would argue that the Catholic Church has showcased that other than top CEOs or leaders of G7 countries, that their head is a global figure like no other, able to capture news headlines like a Trump or a Musk, and to move public opinion the way that a George Clooney or a sports star is able to do so. So I'm advocating that the upcoming conclave use a little-known provision, which is to pick someone who is not from their membership. People may think that the cardinals at the conclave are required to pick one of their number to be the next pope, and that's actually not true. And 6 or 7 centuries ago, they, for example, in the conclave, did not pick one of their number. I would like to see in this moment the Catholic Church go toe-to-toe, not just with Trump, but with neopopulism globally, meaning Putin and Orban and Bolsonaro, and say we have the moral leadership to explain why what you're offering is not only not humane, but not in the religious and human and civilizational traditions of the people who follow you. And very few other institutions or individuals could make that case as compellingly as a new pontiff.
It is true, as you say there, that the Catholic Church wants to set itself up in that kind of vein. But I suppose what's interesting, and I'm curious how Pope Francis also has been perceived in the U.S., is that on the one hand, he has, of course, been critical of the Trump administration when it comes to things like global conflict, also immigration. But at the same time, the Catholic Church is certainly quite conservative and on a line with much of the Republicans when it comes to more social issues. How have they toned that divide, and what would you expect a new pope to do there?
Well, the Catholic Church is an institution that knows how to survive. It dealt with the period of the anti-popes in Avignon about a millennia ago. It understood how to deal with the threat of Mussolini and fascism. It's going to understand how to make a range of alliances, such as those that it needs to operate in Trump's United States. But it also can bring a countervailing force because of what I will call the Pope's soft power. We're in a world now where America, which has traditionally had the most soft power of any player, you know, from Hollywood to the NBA to all of the celebrities that America has, is losing soft power. I see the Catholic Church as having soft power even with Muslims and Jews and Protestants, and that this opportunity to thread the needle, of course, they're not going to change their views necessarily on abortion or on, you know, issues of whether or not women can be priests, and I wouldn't want them to. But to say we're traditional, we're enduring, this is how we've done things, but to call out a political leader like, say, Donald Trump or Orban as not falling in line with the values, the universal values of this Catholic religious tradition. And I think Francis took a step in that direction. But this new selection could allow maybe a more natural political communicator who could get those points across even clearer than Francis was able to.
Jason Pack, host of the Disorder podcast, thank you very much for joining us on today's briefing. And now here's Tom Webb with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff has landed in Moscow ahead of expected talks with President Putin on the Ukraine war. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is ready to reach a deal with the US to end the war, although some elements need to be fine-tuned. Prosecutors in South Korea say they will reinvestigate a stock price manipulation case allegedly involving former First Lady Kim Keon-hee. The reinvestigation comes after the prosecution decided not to indict Kim last October after looking into her alleged involvement. Separately, the prosecutor's office says it rejected an appeal demanding a reinvestigation into Kim's alleged illegal acceptance of a luxury handbag. And all 4 giant pandas at the Adventure World theme park in the western Japan town of Shiokama are set to be returned to China. After the 4 pandas leave for China, only 2 giant pandas will remain in Japan at Tokyo's Ueno Zoological Gardens. It has caused shock in the country after China, who owns all giant pandas, including those born in Japan, made the announcement today. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Such sad news for those pandas. We do love that. We love the pandas. I've seen them in China myself. Thanks very much, Tom, for those headlines. And we're going to stay in the US now, where finance ministers from around the world are gathering for the spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. There will also be a meeting of G20 finance ministers today. But of course, this year, more than ever, finance ministers are less hoping for meetings with each other and more lining up for meetings with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and other American officials who could maybe put in a good word with the big man on trade and tariffs. Well, joining me now is Rajesh Mirchandani, communications executive and journalist. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Rajesh, you've been at these meetings and you've heard some positive words on trade from U.S. officials. Are they feeling the heat from all these ministers in town?
You know, Chris, I think rather than feeling the heat, I think this feels more like a scenario of bad cop, good cop, where the US is playing both. Tariffs were the bad cop. Now the US feels like the US is at pains to say we want to help rebalance global trade to be fairer. Actually, folks, this pummeling we're giving you with tariffs, you'll thank us for it. You know, the US feels confident doing that this week because everyone is in DC. It's home turf. The town is awash with Trump officials all on message. They're not straying from the message at all. And countries are coming and they are, to use the metaphor, they're kissing the ring. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that more than 100 countries had come to the US seeking to negotiate over tariffs. But it's not all nicey nice. Let's remember the EU President Ursula von der Leyen, the elected leader of 500 million consumers, has still not yet been able to get a meeting with President Trump. And of course, those 145% tariffs on China are still in place.
They are still in place, which does beg the question, as you say, whether all of this is just nicey nice while the ministers are in town, or do we expect that when the ministers leave again next week, the US will continue to play nicey nice?
I think there has definitely been a shift, but it is, I think, slightly, if you're a party host and you have a party and you're inviting people you don't really like, then they're going to come and you're going to say, of course, yeah, you're welcome, we're going to be friends. And then they leave and you never call them again. It feels like there is a little bit of that. But at the same time, Trump officials are at pains this week to make the intellectual, economic and rational case for their position. Global trade is imbalanced. No one's disagreeing with that. China is too export-led. It needs more domestic demand. Its currency needs to rise. Europe needs greater productivity and less regulations to spur innovation. The US needs to reduce its budget deficit. Everyone agrees on all of that. But in reality, what shift there has been in tone, the wisdom is due to the bond market sell-offs. After tariffs were imposed by the US, impacted countries usually see their currencies drop. This time the dollar dropped, which worried people here. And then there was a large sell-off in US treasuries, secure investments, which suggests that investors don't have the confidence in the US economy long term. And so the wisdom is that is really why the US has paused some tariffs and is dialing down the messaging.
And when you speak of officials making the intellectual argument, they haven't only been making it on trade. When you look at Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he had this line that America first does not mean America alone. And frankly, I do wonder whether he ran that line before Donald Trump, before saying it himself. But flesh that out for us. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so US Treasury Scott Bessent was speaking at an event on the sidelines of the twice annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF, where finance ministers, development ministers, and senior government officials are all in town. So it is a very finance and trade-oriented discussion, and that was the same for that event. But when he said this line, what he did was he was underscoring America's commitment to the World Bank and IMF. He talked about their enduring value, which actually led to a sigh of relief in Washington, D.C., because there was some speculation the US might actually pull out of the World Bank. That's slightly histrionic, but people were starting to talk about that here. And Secretary Bessent also said that we're doubling down on engagement. However, what he meant by that was that the US is going to be paying much closer attention to exactly how the World Bank and the IMF are doing their work. He accused them both of mission creep. He said they had to get back to their core missions focused on poverty and growth, and that the US is going to use its influence to do that, saying that they were spending way too much time on, quote, climate change, gender, and social issues. So America first does not mean America alone, means, yeah, we're going to be engaged in the world. We need the world, you need us. But it needs to be the world in the way we want to see it.
Just finally then, Rajesh, we heard at the top of the show from Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director, or a quote from her, rather. And I do wonder how IMF officials and World Bank officials are going to be responding to those comments from Scott Bessent. Are they willing to play ball, or are they going to defend their turf?
It was very interesting. I was at watching a press conference, a debate rather, with Managing Director Georgieva and also senior finance officials from around the world, including the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the German Finance Minister Jörg Kukis yesterday. There was a distinctly upbeat tone to the meeting, quite a lot of agreement. Yes, regulations have to come down. Yes, we have to rebalance global trade. Yes, it is unfair. And that was quite striking. So I think the bank and the fund are both putting on a very positive face. Yeah, this is great. We're having this open dialogue, and it's great that the US is still so engaged. At the same time, they know that the US is focused much more on how they're spending money, particularly on issues like climate. Ajay Banga has been at pains to explain the 45% of World Bank loans, which are climate related, as actually being climate smart development. For example, painting the roof of a school white so that kids can actually learn, because that's how they can get better jobs. And Kristalina Georgieva yesterday was talking about, we respond to the needs of our members countries. So if a country that has a lot of weather-related incidents comes to us and say our GDP is taking a massive hit, we'll work with them on how to shore up their finances to make sure that doesn't happen again. So again, climate smart growth policies. So there's a bit of language manipulation there, but I think the institutions will be breathing a sigh of relief this week, but also they'll be carefully wondering, okay, how does this dial down into the detail? And if I was the United Nations, I'd seriously be a little bit concerned about what the Trump administration is going to say to them when nations gather in New York in September for the UN General Assembly.
That will be another international gathering to watch. Rajesh Mirchandani in Washington, D.C., thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. And finally on today's show, it is time for some more in-house news, because Monocle's very own website has been given a reboot. Yes, the publication known for glossy public print magazines is upgrading its digital offerings. And here to tell us why is Andrew Tuck, Monocle's editor-in-chief. Andrew, you've been in Jakarta for the Chiefs conference this week, and I played dumb about that on Wednesday's show. I'm going to play dumb again today. What's Monocle's website like, Andrew?
Well, it's gleaming new, and it's a lot whiter than it used to be. So these decisions sound small, but the brand is known for the magazine with that heavy, nice black cover with the white lettering saying Monocle. Well, it's reversed on the website. The website had been in that same world of design and color, but now it's changed. And so for me, it's quite a simple but dramatic change when you go there to see a new world of branding. But the reason we've done it is because we haven't upgraded our digital experience for a long time, and we still as a business we make money and we find readers and we spend time with people. That's why I'm here in Jakarta, and we do that. Apologies for that. We do that in print mostly, but now we're going to find that actually there is some storytelling that we want to do in a digital format. E-com is a huge part of our business now, and we need to make sure that we're reaching people as an e-com customer. So yeah, it's a moment of change that was needed. But boy, it's complicated building a website. So it's taking us a little bit longer than we'd hoped, but we're there now.
It's inevitably complicated, Andrew. But tell us also about some of the differences when it comes to content, because this isn't just about, say, bringing the magazine to life digitally. There will be digital-only content as well.
Yes, so one of the things that we have developed over the years, both in the Monocle Minute and in the magazine, is a set of relationships with comment writers and essayists that we also want to bring to life on .com. So there'll be additional comment pieces every single day that will only appear there. And I think the other interesting thing is that we are producing a series of city guides that will only be for subscribers to the digital edition or to the print magazine. And we're starting with 12 of those, but they will be added to over the coming weeks. So every couple of weeks we'll be putting up a new batch. And that's our bureau chiefs, our correspondents, deep dives into the cities that they know best. And I think that's one of the reasons that people often come to our website. They try and use search to locate pieces from the past about cities. So that will be a really important step for us as well, as we begin to look after our readers in a deeper way, making sure that that the information that we have about the places that we care about, we can give to people in ways that they can use and enjoy and have fun with.
And Andrew, just finally, we will be hearing later on today on the Monocle Daily from our digital creator, if I can call her that, Kate Lucy. But a word on the team, Kate and the whole digital team. They have been working pretty tirelessly on a very complicated launch.
Yeah, of course. In these things, you have outside partners. We worked with a very interesting design company who's helped us along the way. But in the end, you need some people in-house who hustle and who know what's needed and who understand the expectations around the brand for Monocle and what people expect us to deliver as an experience. So, yeah, we have a big team. Well, a big team. We have several people who've been dedicated to this, but Kate Lucy's been leading the charge. And it's a tough thing to bring together because, as I said, it's editorial, it's e-com, it's subscriptions, it's the radio player, how people get to listen to shows such as yours, Chris. So all of those things she's had to kind of mix and make sure all have come to fruition at exactly the same time. It's like baking like 20 different cakes and hoping they'll all come out of the oven exactly at the same moment, which somehow she's done.
Andrew Tuck, thank you very much for joining us. I would invite everyone to check out our new website now. And that's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb. Our researcher was Francesca Jokes, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for listening.